Some cases end when you close the file, others don't. They follow you home. Not because of what went wrong on paper, but because of what it revealed about people. This one started like any other, a 1099 from Airbnb showing income that didn't match the tax return. A Schedule C, a few line items, and a note that said vacation rental management. Straightforward, or so I thought. When I called the taxpayer back, their voice was calm, a little tired, with the accent of someone who'd been living overseas for a while. They explained they managed properties for others, hosted clean, coordinated bookings, and kept a percentage for the work. But every rental was processed through their own Airbnb account. The 1099 showed the total, not their share. On paper, that difference turned into unreported income. In real life, it was survival. They'd left the US after a family death, couldn't afford to come back yet, and were trying to rebuild from somewhere far away. They mentioned a new baby on the way. They laughed softly and said, "I just need to get this cleared up before the baby comes." I told them what I tell everyone. We just need documentation. Contracts, payment logs, bank splits, something to show that most of the money went to property owners. They promised to send it. I believed them. Looking back, maybe that's why this one stuck with me. Because for a while, I really thought we'd fix it. But some stories don't end with resolution. Some end with silence. When the first round of documents didn't arrive, I didn't think much of it. People get busy, time zones complicate things, overseas taxpayers have to juggle connections, currencies, even scanning paperwork. I sent a gentle reminder, polite, procedural. 2 weeks later, I sent another. They replied, apologetic, saying they were still gathering contracts from property owners. They sounded genuine, overwhelmed, but trying. I believed them. Then 2 more weeks passed. Nothing. In the audit world, silence is its own kind of answer. It doesn't mean refusal. Not yet. Just resistance. It's that moment when the taxpayer realizes what cooperation might cost. For this one, I think the realization hit when they started seeing the math. Without documentation to show payments back to the homeowners, the full 1099 income was taxable. It wasn't fraud. It wasn't even negligence. It was a structural mistake, but a costly one. And that's where the human part of compliance gets heavy. Sometimes telling the truth isn't enough to make the math fair. I waited longer on this case than I should have. Every case has a timeline. 10 days for document request, extensions for good cause, 30 days for unagreed closing procedures that keep the workload balanced. But this one didn't feel like a file to balance. It felt like a life unraveling in slow motion, and I didn't want to make it worse. So I kept giving them time. I told myself it was empathy. My manager would later call it attachment. When the third IDR deadline came and went, I made one last call. It rang to voicemail. I left a message that was equal parts formal and hopeful, reminded them of the document due date, explained what would happen if they didn't respond. I spoke slower than usual. It was my way of leaving space, just in case they were listening. 2 days later, I sent the unagreed report, a summary of findings, proposed adjustments, and the standard 30-day letter. It's a document I've sent hundreds of times, but that one felt different. The words were the same, but the silence behind them made it feel heavier. My manager reviewed and approved it the same afternoon. I remember staring at the screen before sending it out. It's strange how a click can carry so much weight. In that moment, I thought about what they told me, about losing family, living abroad, trying to start over, about the baby on the way. I wonder if that email would reach them before the birth. I wondered if they'd open it. I told myself they still had 30 days to respond, and if they didn't, they had options like appeals. But I knew the truth. Most people don't. Once they stop replying, they rarely come back. 30 days came and went. I called to try and get some kind of response. Instead of closing the case out on the 30-day expiration, I unofficially gave an extra week hoping for a response. But nothing. So I closed the case out unagreed. And then, a few days later, they did. I logged in one morning and saw a message timestamped from the night before. Attachments, scanned contracts, emails between them and the property owners. Proof that might have changed the entire outcome. My stomach dropped. I went straight to my manager and asked if I could reopen the case. She shook her head. She didn't allow it once the case was closed and sent out to technical services for review. The taxpayer would have to go to appeals. That's procedure. It protects consistency and prevents bias. But it also means sometimes you can't fix what you know could have been fixed. I'd waited weeks for a response, and when it finally came, it was too late to matter. That's the hardest part of this job. Not the confrontation, not the paperwork. It's the waiting. The quiet in between where you see someone fading out of the process and you can't reach through the screen to pull them back in. You just have to document, close, and move on. But sometimes cases don't stay closed. They echo. Every time I see a new 1099 mismatch or an overseas address, I think of that file, of what a few days or a few words might have changed. In the end, I did my job. I followed every rule, every procedure, but that doesn't mean it felt right. Some nights I still think about that message, the one that came a day too late, and I wonder if they ever knew how close they were to being understood. After that case, I started to notice how silence feels inside an audit file. It doesn't sit flat. It hums. Every unreturned call, every missing document, you can almost feel the tension trapped between the pages. On paper, it's just unresponsive, but in practice, it's heartbreak. People freeze for all kinds of reasons. Shame, fear, exhaustion. They think if they disappear, the problem stops moving. It doesn't. The IRS keeps time like a metronome. Letters go out, clocks keep ticking, interest keeps growing, and every day they don't respond, the space for compassion shrinks. That's what compliance costs sometimes, connection. The system can't pause for emotion. We give extensions, not empathy. We send notices, not reassurance. It's not cruelty, it's structure. But when structure meets struggle, somebody always feels unseen. I used to carry that weight home. Not in the dramatic way people imagine, just a quiet heaviness that sat between dinner and bedtime. You spend your day verifying numbers, and suddenly you're thinking about what those numbers meant to someone else. A roof, a ticket home, a crib waiting in another country. The policy was right. Closing the case was the correct call. But the human side of me kept asking if correctness was enough. That's the balance every agent learns to hold. Empathy without interference. You can care, but you can't compromise procedure. Still, caring doesn't turn off at 4:30 p.m., it just follows you quietly until you file the next return. That case reminded me why transparency matters. If the taxpayer had just answered one more email, one more call, we would have solved it together. They didn't need perfection, they needed participation. The IRS isn't built to guess your intent, it's built to evaluate your evidence. Once you stop providing it, the story ends whether it's finished or not. So if you ever find yourself in that place, overwhelmed, embarrassed, avoiding the envelope on your kitchen table, respond anyway. Even a single sentence is better than silence. You might be surprised how far honesty goes, even when the outcome isn't ideal. Professionally, that case taught me patience has limits. Personally, it taught me compassion doesn't. Because behind every audit letter is a person. Someone who built something, lost something, or is just trying to stay afloat. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they vanish. But most of them never meant to end up here. I still think about that taxpayer. I imagine them holding their newborn, opening a government envelope, realizing they missed their window. Maybe they filed an appeal. Maybe they didn't. Either way, the system moved on, and so did I. But part of me wishes I could have said one last thing. You were closer than you thought. That's the human cost of compliance. Doing what's required even when it doesn't feel right. And sometimes that cost shows up not in dollars or penalties, but in the space between people who almost understood each other. Next time on Audit After Hours, we close out the series with a reflection. What audits teach us about business, money, and the quiet resilience it takes to stay compliant without living in fear? Some cases end on paper, others end in your mind weeks later, long after the report is signed and the system marks it closed. This one still lingers, not because of the numbers, those were simple, but because of everything the numbers couldn't show. I followed every rule. I did my job exactly as I was trained, but when the final notice went out, it didn't feel like resolution. It felt like loss. There's a quiet weight that comes with doing something right that still feels wrong. You don't forget that. You just learn to carry it. That's the part of auditing few people see. We measure proof, not people. But people are the reason the proof exists at all. Their choices, their fears, their silence, it all lives inside those spreadsheets. I think that's why this case stayed with me. It reminded me that compliance is rarely about math. It's about humanity trying to fit inside rules built for precision. Sometimes it fits neatly, sometimes it doesn't. So if you've ever find yourself staring at a letter from the IRS, uncertain or afraid, just remember, silence never helps. Respond. Ask. Clarify. The system can handle imperfection. It can't handle absence. I'm Lauren, a former IRS agent turned bookkeeper, and this is Audit After Hours. In our final episode, What Audits Teach Us About Life and Business, we'll step back from the files to talk about what all of this really means. Not for the IRS, but for everyone just trying to keep their numbers honest and their sanity intact. Audit After Hours is a Zero Fluff Books production written and hosted by me, Lauren Twitchell, a former IRS agent turned bookkeeper. This mini-series was created to pull back the curtain on what really happens inside small business audits, and to remind you that understanding your numbers isn't about fear, it's about freedom. Production support, editing, and post-mix by the Zero Fluff Books media team. For free resources, bookkeeping tools, and upcoming podcast updates, visit zerofluffbooks.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube at Zero Fluff Books. Thank you for spending this season with me, for listening, reflecting, and proving that the story behind the numbers always matter. Until next time, keep your books clean, your receipts handy, and your confidence high.